The New Garden is a podcast on technological power, promise, and peril. Technology is no longer just a set of tools. It's a force that shapes our desires, our communities, and even our theology. The New Garden explores what it means to live faithfully at a time when humanity can rewrite genomes, simulate consciousness, and manufacture joy with the push of a button. Drawing from Christian tradition and moral imagination, the podcast confronts the tension between what is possible and what might undo us. Each episode is a guided reflection on our age of godlike power, an invitation to discern how we cultivate this new garden without becoming the serpent in it. Welcome to another episode of the New Garden podcast. Our guest today is Ilia Delio. She is the head of the Center for Christogenesis and a professor of theology at Villanova University. And we cover what is the line with transhumanism and ultrahumanism. What do we want for our physiology, for our bodies in this AI and technology era, and what does it mean for our theology? It's a rich episode. We cover a lot of ground. Without further ado, enjoy the episode with Ilia Delio. Ilia, thank you so much for joining us on the New Garden podcast. Excited to have you on here today.
Thanks a lot, Fred. It's great to be here with you and Tony.
Tony and I were doing some pre-show preparation, and we were joking that you have a theological vocabulary that is not found in the Common Book of Prayer or many of the mainline traditions. And we're hoping that you can do a little bit of kind of definitional level setting for us.
Sure.
So when you say things like evolutionary Christianity, can you define that and bring us to life and tell our listeners who may not be as familiar some about your perspective and how you see the theological world?
Yes, no, great question. It's a faux pas of theologians. We get stuck in technical language. So evolutionary Christianity. So maybe by way of background, I was first a scientist before I was a theologian. So I've always had a great love for science. And, this relationship between science and religion is still somewhat vague culturally. People are not sure, how do we treat science? Do we incorporate faith with it? Do we keep these things apart? And so it's not clear. But, if you go back to the Middle Ages, where a lot of our theology was born, science was natural philosophy. It's the way we just understand the world. When I look up the heavens and the moon and the stars, which you arrange, as the psalmist said, well, that looking up, that observation is basically what science is. We observe, we measure, we describe, and so science provides insights. All of this to say is, I have looked, so we also know that theology is an experience of the divine. But philosophy has given us kind of the structure and the framework to define that experience when we use the word God, for example, or we say salvation. We have content to those words because we have formally identified how we understand this divine or God at work in human nature or in creation. All this to say is philosophy has always been the support of theology. Now, I say that because a lot of our philosophy kind of stopped around maybe the 16th century, but maybe just a little bit before, while science has, proceeded on. So what was maybe one happy, relationship in the Middle Ages which was philosophy was, science rather, was a natural form of philosophy, just observing and measuring and describing, took off on its own. So now we have science and philosophy and theology, 3 areas. So what I've done is basically say, well, look, science is the best description of what is the real, or what exists, what is being, what is existence. And therefore I use science to reflect on thinking about existence itself or being. So when I use the word evolution, I am not thinking like, oh gosh, God made monkeys and chimpanzees and now we're all related, which I do think actually in the span of things we are, but that's not how I'm using this. Evolution is a descriptive term here. It really means that things are not just put in place like God didn't just say, and let there be light, ta-da, or let there be humans, ta-da. God's not a magician. God is the power of life that brings life to life, basically. And life works as a very rather slow, meandering process. I mean, you only have to live for, 70 years, like me, to know that it wanders, it makes choices. Some things are good, some choices dead ends. And so life is always kind of peat and repeat, but it's always building on previous experiences. Evolution is something like that, and so it's a type of understanding the way this power of life that we name as God is at work, or somehow empowering this life towards more life. And that is the incredible, last word of evolution is life seeks more life. That's the natural world. When even in the vast destructions of evolutionary history, I mean cataclysmic events, you would think total decimation, we can never, well, guess what? Out of that decimation, something lives, and that little something that lives sparks up and gives life to more life. And therefore, evolution is not to be feared. It's not to be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what she's talking about with evolution. It's just saying that life is not static. Life is not, creation is not like a Lego set, that we put together. Creation is about deep relationality. And that's exactly what evolution's about, deep relationality, or what we call process, relationships that form and deform and reform, but always moving into something more deeply relational. And that's why I think evolutionary theology is a very appropriate term for the world we find ourselves in today. We know it's a world of change. We experience that change. We're constantly wondering, when is it ever going to stop? And the answer is, well, never. So let go and enjoy the change, And the question is, what are we changing into? And that's why we're here, to find that out a little bit more.
Ilia, is God changing in this theological framework? Is God
Well,
in process?
that's another great question, right? So our Thomistic theology, which is basically, whether it's a literal understanding of God from Scripture or Thomas Aquinas, we have this idea of God as, operatively, if I take from medieval art, like God is one big being, one super dude, like one big guy in the sky, and watching over us, all God's children. And that's a very anthropomorphic understanding of God. We project ourselves onto this great unknown, this mystery that we name as God. And Thomas would say, of course, Thomas Aquinas, just to be clear, did not hold that, super dude idea. His idea was God was being itself. And therefore, God as existence, as essence and existence, the very beingness of being, was the source of all being, was the source of all life. And so for Thomas, because God is being itself, and therefore the being of being, or the source of our very existence, God has no real relationship to us, simply by the fact that God is. But we have a real relationship to God because, in a sense, our lives are dependent on another. And so for Thomas, there's no real relationship between God and world. Now, that has shifted in the modern era with Alfred North Whitehead, who's the father of process theology. Now, for Whitehead, he did not think of God as what we would say ontologically distinct or completely other than us. So that idea of a super dude God or the super guy in the sky, that really is saying God is not us, right? God is a being who's not created being. God is uncreated being. And Whitehead is more like Duns Scotus, the Franciscan, who said, well, there's just being, there's just existence. And within existence, there's divine being and, uncreated being and created being. And so Whitehead is more like that, that it's just being, and God's part of the beingness, and so are we. So Whitehead would hold that there's a real relationship between God and world. And honestly, if you go back to the Old Testament, it'd be hard to really rule out a real relationship between God and world. I mean, God in the old Yahweh in the Old Testament is deeply affected by Israel. If God was not affected, he wouldn't be running after Israel all the time. Going, getting all upset, like, what are you doing? You're straying far from me. Without real relationship, it's hard to really support that, covenant, that deep covenant between God and Israel. So, what Whitehead's support of process theology, however, is not really the Old Testament. It really comes from quantum physics, and the way he understands what matter is and what existence is. And so, for Whitehead, God is sort of that wholeness, that principle of wholeness, or that guiding lure for life to become something of more life. And so, as Whitehead's famous dictum is, God affects the world and the world affects God. And I think that makes a lot of sense if God is love. There's nothing worse than having a unilateral relationship in love, right? Of what value would that be? Like, God is love, but really, I really don't care whether or not what you do, So for Whitehead, as for Teilhard, God is affected by the world. But just kind of a PS here, Whitehead's God, and Teilhard de Chardin has his own version of this, has a dipolar nature. So there's a part of God, which he calls the primordial pole, which is sort of the uncreated side, what we might call the mystery of God. We can never exhaust what God means or who God is. And then Whitehead says there's the consequential side, the consequence side, the part of God that's really involved in the world, affected by the world, takes up the world's choices, and is constantly evaluating things. So that idea of God as what in the Catholic tradition we call this, maybe Christian, you don't have to be Catholic, a coincidence of opposites, right? God is uncreated, created, unmanifest, manifest, primordial, consequent. And that, I think, is much truer to what this mystery of God is as a dialectic, unresolved, neither wholly other nor wholly with us. So is God affected? Absolutely.
Yeah, the holy other resonates as a Reformed Christian, certainly with Karl Barth's theology and the event of Jesus Christ. Even in God's revelation of God's self, there's this profound mystery that we don't have. And his dialectic was, you can't talk about God, but you have to, right? And which is a beautiful encouragement. If I could ask maybe more of a sort of practical question, when you're at worship, when you're at mass, or when you're at prayer, and go as deep as you want to go here, and be as vulnerable as you want. How does does your theological life influence your prayer life, your worship life, and then your sort of acts of mercy, acts of compassion out in the world? Like, how has it shaped that part of your piety?
So, a lot of my own theological thinking has and continues. In fact, I'm just finishing up a book as we speak called The Christian Mutation. But it is a constant growth and development in this mystery of God. So, again, even as you phrase Karl Barth, that statement of Karl Barth, we tend to, when we say God is wholly other, I think we tend to think of that wholly other outside ourselves. But, if we go back to the New Testament, and the person of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus was Jewish, so, he was brought up with, the Jewish God, the covenantal God, the ethical, the God who, in a sense, is in deep relationship, a God of compassionate love, but a God who is transcendent, wholly other, And yet, that's not Jesus's God. Then that's what the amazing thing is, right? Jesus doesn't even relate to God as wholly other, but as deeply immanent. And I was thinking about this the other day, from John's Gospel, or even you find it in some ways in the Synoptics. The Father and I are one. The Father and I. So if God is not one apart from the I, and the I is not fully I apart from God. It's telling us something about God and personhood, or God and self. And Jesus comes to that awareness, not through the law, not through, traditional Judaism, but through deep prayer, right? That sojourn in the desert is symbolic of almost like Jung's idea that we have to go within and face ourselves. We have to face the darkness within ourselves, and I think those temptations in the desert are the same things we experience when we really become honestly self-reflective, right? And so coming into those deeper levels of the psyche, Jesus was not a psychologist, but it wouldn't be hard to see the fact that he evokes a new level of mind in relation to the divine. And that's something very few people have really spoken about or even deepened. In fact, most of Christianity, most religion keeps the mind, like especially in the West, the monotheistic, it keeps the mind outside the relationship between God and self, And so this idea of God as wholly other becomes something that we project outside ourselves. And therefore we feel obedient to something beyond ourselves. All of this to say is I have thought quite a bit about a God. In fact, the mystery of God, if I were to just take this one step further, is the mystery of the human person. In other words, there's something about us, right? You can't extract God from the human person, although we do it all the time. We cognitively separate God and person, or God and self. But the fact is, you really can't do that. And so there's something here about us that is very mysterious. We ourselves may indeed be the very mystery of this reality that we call God, and therefore we can never access the depth of our own mystery. It's always beyond us, and therefore we project. Now, there's good news and bad news here. One is, I think New Testament, I think Jesus was all about, right? The reign of God, the kingdom of God is within you, right? God is here in the now. But, we didn't know what that meant. I mean, certainly the first century disciples, they really weren't sure what to make of all this, but there was something about Jesus that was deeply transformative and charismatic, and they followed him. And I think it has taken us up until the 20th century to realize that what was going on in Jesus of Nazareth was even more radical than we have yet, given credit for. And I think we forged Christianity into this monotheistic faith that resembles Judaism, only it's got a slightly different, flavor to it. Now we have Jesus thrown in there, but I think it's very different. I think there's something very different going on here. And actually, if we could really understand what's going on here, I think a lot of our questions about AI and culture and everything else would actually find a new level of meaning. So to answer your question, Tony, is a long way around to say is, my prayer life has deeply changed from my own theological reflections. I have actually moved from a God outside me, although I relate it. God is like, in the old Martin Buber sense, the I-thou. So that I-thou relationship is very deeply personal. And so that relationship is very meaningful to me, even in terms of prayer. But I see the whole as a new complex, like this whole God-self-world relationship is a new complex. And it has changed even as I go about the world. I find myself, I'm very intrigued by the human person, for one thing. And I find myself more looking into another person's face, the eyes, because I think every single person is that fractal of divine love, is that presence of the mystery of God in his or her own way. And therefore I've learned to slow down a little bit, to let go, to be more patient. And I think I've also stopped worrying about everything, because this God works wholly in this moment of time. And all that we long for, all that we need, all that we desire is right here, in this moment. And it's really fantastic, that's all I can say. But it does require a deepening, a moving into deeper centers of self-awareness, self-consciousness, and this is what prayer is about, I believe, as well.
Thank you. Thanks for going there. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it segues us nicely into the technology moment, because if the mystery of God is conveyed in the human person, then we are rapidly attaining the ability to alter the human person in ways that we never have and maybe couldn't have imagined previously. And so what I wonder about that is, what is our role in this ongoing divine evolution? And also, when we think about evolution, we think about life and organic alteration of life. Now we're talking about inorganic elements interacting with organic elements in life in ways that are maybe going to fundamentally alter the human person. And so what do you see as our role in that ongoing evolution, and how does it change when these super technologies are getting introduced to the human person?
Right. That's a great question, Brent. So, I think let me just begin by saying technology has always been part and parcel of evolution. It's nothing different than what biology has done for eons. In fact, we are here because nature is techne. Nature is creative. It can access the tools of its environment. It creatively creates things. So, ants and beavers and clams, it's all technological. So technology is not the problem. It is then now the question of the human person and extending our minds, or whatever this information is that allows us to create almost like a mirror image of our thinking process in an artificial way, in a silicon way. And it's quickly changing us. You're absolutely right. It's like a vortex. So there's a lot here that I just want to kind of unpack a little bit. For one thing, I think cyberspace is, in a sense, because it is this vast fields of information. In other words, it's sort of like a quantum field of infinite possibilities. And it's also sort of like the collective unconscious, right? Any possible archetype, any possible, existence is, in a sense, what cyberspace is about. You can be anything, you can do anything, you can think anything. And while that has a lure to it, because that, in a sense, that kind of perfect knowledge is what we might call the beatific vision of some sort. It's deeply religious, right? The religion is that passion for ultimacy, ultimate knowledge, ultimate union, ultimate love. And AI is like, guess what? Well, we have this now in code. So, for one thing, some would say, well, technology, just replaces religion. Religion's just outdated. It's just old software and just old, it certainly hasn't lived up to its hype. So now we can create the very type of perfected existence that always, certainly in the Judeo-Christian, thing, we've anticipated for a long time. And that's a little bit scary because, for one thing, it is creating a virtual kind of apocalyptic scene or a heavenly scene without God, right? Without a living divine presence. And, not a lot, but there are people in Silicon Valley today who have this godlike, image that who needs God when we can be gods. So there's a difference when I say we have a divine depth. I don't mean that we are gods in the sense of the totality of divinity. I'm saying that there's something about us that is enwrapped or entangled with the mystery of God. That's different from saying, gee, with technology, we can become gods ourselves. Kind of the Nietzschean idea. We push God out, God died, now we'll have a will to power. This will be gods ourselves. That's scary when you have like a bunch of gods in Silicon Valley as to whose god is going to win and who's going to be most powerful. And so we're back in a sense to the ancient, the old gods of conflict and power. That's so. So let me just say this: without understanding what a god in evolution possibly means, AI is without its divine meaning. It's without any kind of real teleology. And this, I think, is a fundamental problem. So I think of AI sort of as an Acela train, or an Amtrak train running at high speed with no conductor. And it's basically like, wow, isn't this cool? We're going at, 300 miles an hour. And it's like, well, where are you going? I don't know, so we're just going to crash into the wall, I guess. And it's like, well, we'll build new technologies just in case we crash, so we can get those who survived, into new bodies, and we'll put them in outer space or something like this. So all of this has a real potential to derail, and we should be deeply concerned about it. But my other deep concern is the way Christianity, I'm going to take Christianity because it's what I know best, has very, very limited understanding of evolution and AI, to say, oh no, don't spend too much with AI. Keep computers out of the classroom. They're going to harm us. Well, that's not going to work either. That's actually, I think, the kind of resistance to AI makes no difference to Silicon Valley, for one thing. And it actually just leaves us without any direction. So this is where I tried to put together Teilhard de Chardin's notion. So we have to begin with the big picture. So to talk about AI extrapolated from the whole big picture of evolution, cosmic evolution, biological evolution, it just leaves us without any GPS signal, right? We're just talking about a technology, but it has no context. Like, how are we going to discern here? And you can't just use virtue ethics or the Gospels, Jesus said to love your neighbor type thing. That ain't going to work. So we have to understand how life, this is why I spend a lot of time on science. And I think one thing, and if I were just to, shout out here, fourth graders know more on evolution and modern science today than a lot of people, baby boomers and, millennials, because it's somehow we've marginalized science. That's not for me, that's for the experts, And I'm saying we have to understand what the contents of evolution are about. What is emergence, for example? What does complexity mean? And then why is there direction in evolution at all? That's a huge question that scientists can't answer. And if we can begin to entertain that and then ask, well, what's taking place here? And then maybe understand what this name God might mean within this full complexifying process of evolution. Then we can understand Teilhard's idea that we're moving from the biosphere, or the realm of biological life, to a new level, a more complex level of cosmic life that he calls the noosphere, or the level of mind, interconnected mind, or the global brain. And in Teilhard's view, that's not a disconnect from the bio world. That actually is a deepening of what we are. So he is not a transhumanist, like, oh, who needs this body? We're just going to put silicon bodies on and, download our brains. And no, he said materiality can give us well-being, but he said spirituality gives us more being. And he used the term the ultra-human. And I think we haven't ourselves bought into what we want to be when we grow up with AI. Do we want to be ultra-human? Do we want to be transhuman? Do we want to be post-human? And we don't know. We're scared by the whole thing, quite honestly, even though we're completely embedded in AI. And therefore, I think we need a better narrative of contextualizing AI within a wider framework of evolution to ask, what do we want with our technologies and how might we best get there? I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's in a sense how I'm thinking about these things.
And I'm piecing together that you have that directly linked with your theology and your relationship with God, in that us asking that as our participation in evolutionary Christianity, in this evolutionary process, to guide us towards this level of ultra human, but to do it with Christian principles embedded, Jesus' example at the forefront, and then a guiding light of love as the supreme ethic to buy into who we want to be and to define that. Am I piecing that together correctly?
Yeah, that's basically correct, Brent. I mean, basically, we're saying, basically, I'm saying if God is the name of that energetic presence of divine love, there's a power here, an energy, and love is the answer. Love, using Tara's language, is the irresistible force of the universe. It drives everything. And, sometimes we over complexify our lives and we're lost in all the stuff. But for Teilhard, is like the universe is grounded in love and oriented toward the fullness of love. And basically, we're saying, and the question is, can AI help deepen us, in a collective way, in a planetary way, towards greater love? And that means greater compassion, forgiveness, nonviolence, peace, and the deepening respect, and also a working together. So moving out of individualism and a collaboration of heart and mind for the good of the whole, And so I think putting AI within a larger framework of evolution and love in evolution can maybe help us make some choices. Should we download our brains? Should we get a chip in our brain? Which this stuff is right around the corner.
Yeah, and we originally called this episode Transhumanism, Where is the Line? Which I'm going to change it to Ultra Humans, Where is the Line? And so is there a line? We had asked a question, is there a difference between gene therapy and healing what's broken and prosthetics than designer babies or, manipulating your cognition or, genetic appearance alteration? Is there a line that you draw, and how should we navigate that as what's become possible or what becomes possible? We then to say, just because we could, should we?
Exactly. So I think, these questions, the ethical questions, I think have to move out of the individual, like, should I get, have CRISPR done? So, well, I think for those with life-threatening diseases, I am for biomedical, genetic engineering, for example, sickle cell anemia, or if it could heal, some forms of Parkinson's disease. And I think there are some, but how do we know where to draw that line, right? And so I look at it this way. Again, it's all about context for me. So we are persons, but we are persons within communities, within families, within community, within society. So the question is, if I do this, will I be deepened or more enhanced as a person to be part of a larger whole? That's the question. It's a question of wholeness. Does or do I use this technology to single myself out and make myself over and above the others, the fragmented whole or the partial whole that it is? In other words, if I just perfect myself to the exclusion of the whole, that is, to me, can border on the unethical insofar as I can do stuff to myself like a DIY, change everything about you kit. And toward what end? What good is that? What is the good of this? But if I, in a sense, can enhance myself, because deepening what I am will deepen love, in my life, in my relationships, in how I can see and affect others. In other words, I can contribute to greater wholeness in and through this technology than without it. Then I think that would be a good. So discerning the good for me has to keep the lens or the hermeneutic of wholeness in the forefront.
Yeah, and I think we have enough examples in the modern market economy that a lot of our natural movement is towards self-orientation rather than wholeness.
Absolutely.
And, one thing that I've been curious about is if I, honestly take inventory on my own heart and inclinations in my life, then I'm not terribly Christ-like. and that I am selfish and fearful and greedy. And so I've wondered, okay, are these emerging technologies, is their ability to kind of rewire and to be formed into something more like Jesus? And I've wondered about AI as the thought partner. I've wondered about psilocybin and psychedelics. I definitely wonder about neural implants. And I've wondered, is that the re-engineering of my own inclinations and my heart and my wiring towards being more Christ-like? And I'm curious if that aspiration to re-engineer ourselves, does that have any theological legitimacy? Is that perhaps our authentic participation in redemption? Or is that like me kind of wanting a cop-out?
Well, the funny thing is, I think it's David Noble, the Canadian historian, who wrote in his book, The Religion of Technology, that spirituality was actually a type of technology. So, a technology of the spirit. In other words, that prayer, contemplation, all those things were considered technologies of the spirit. So anything that alters or that changes us can be considered a technology. We're at a new level of technology today where, it's artificial. And I think unlike, for example, say the ancient monastics, with deep contemplation and transformation, a type of technology that would transform the person into a more Christ-like figure. Our technologies today are deeply tied to capitalism. So we have a techno-social capitalistic technology that would have been unheard of in the monastic period. And this is where I think, the question now is, we are so sucked into capitalism, quite honestly. We're so inured by it. We're so imbued by it that we're not even questioning anymore, should we be doing this? It's like everyone's doing it. I got to do it too if I'm going to be socially acceptable. And therefore, I think we are becoming more fragmented, hyper individualized, and excessively preoccupied with ourselves, how we look, how fast we're moving, our heart rates, our blood pressure, everything. And therefore, if we're so preoccupied by these physiological things, we're not even attentive to the spiritual things, right? So a preoccupation on the level of the physical self can really leave, the spiritual self a little bit abandoned. It's like an isolation syndrome, So we become soulless. And I think when we're soulless, then we're not much different than our machines, right? We're just become another machine. And that's prime for technological capitalism. Great. If you're a new machine, if you're just another machine, we can update your machine. We can replace your parts. We'll make you a better machine, a faster machine. So what I think we're losing here in all of this is a technology that deepens the soul, deepens the center of us, deepens that hidden center, that Christic center, that divine dimension that we talked about before. And it's not just an app, it's just like, well, you can use this app and, meditate for 15 minutes. That's not bad, by the way, but it's just not that. And so we're losing a sense of what makes us human persons and what it means to be a person. And so one of the great, I think, fears today is just becoming another cog in the machine. And there's a real possibility. Let's put it this way. We are an evolution. That's not the question. The question is, what are we going to become? Are we going to literally just evolve out of humanity altogether and just become completely machinic? In other words, we'll move from biology to silicon completely. Or will we, in a sense, can we use AI to deepen what we are and focus on developing more soulful wisdom, compassion? I think we haven't engaged these questions sufficiently, and we don't know what it means. We don't know, even from a religious perspective, how do we enfold AI in the deepening of the whole person for the whole community and the whole planet.
Ilia, if this takes root, I was thinking about just sort of like eras, very much from a Christocentric perspective, right? Or Christianity perspective. Every 500 years or so, we have sort of a revolution or a
Mhm.
reformation. Christianity moving from the margins to the center of culture, the split between the Western Church, the Church of Rome, the Eastern Church,
Mm.
then the Protestant Reformation, of course, in 1500. Now, like we're about that time. We're due. Could you see this as a reformation? Because and by the way, every reformation starts with like these profound questions about something's not right with me and my relationship with God and God's relationship with the world, and we've
Yeah.
got to reconfigure it, right? We've got to talk about it differently.
Yeah.
Like, and not to, and I know I'm asking somebody who's like at the front of the line on and has been for a long time about this question. So I'm not trying to set you up to be self-serving or anything like that, but but do you think we're on the precipice of the next Reformation?
I do. I do because if I look at the emergence of religion in the span of evolution, right, we can go back thousands and thousands of years, way before the monotheistic faiths, emerged. So we had archaic religion. So here let me just put it in a nutshell. Religion is a function of of consciousness and harmonization. It's a function of human evolution. It's not to reduce religion or empty of its contents or anything. It is to say, however, that religion is, in a sense, it's a biological phenomenon. It's the depth dimension of what we are. So we have only treated ourselves in terms of the material or horizontal dimensions, but there's a depth dimension, that we call the spirit, the soul. There's something about us that is not reducible to matter itself, to mere matter. And therefore, over time, that religious dimension of our lives has shifted from archaic religions to the axial religions, to the emergence of the monotheistic traditions. We are in a new age today. I mean, I've written about this a lot on the second axial period. Even that, was just prophetically described by Ewer Cousins and Thomas Berry. And now we're entering more into the midst of that new axial consciousness, which means religion itself is shifting. And the way I see it shifting is, and I think the ingredients for the shift are really enfolded in Christianity, not because it's the better religion or anything like that. It's just simply that it is a religion of historical development, of consciousness rising. That's the whole point. It points towards something that is not yet. Um, and therefore, I think Christianity is in a state of being reborn today, or kind of moving into a new kind of level of understanding, not as something separate, but as something complexified in relation to not only other religions, but the environment and AI and the world. And that's why I've tried to reformulate what do we mean by the Christ or the Christic. I think Teilhard de Chardin was very prophetic in his vision of these things, but he lived in a particular historical time period, and now we have to build on his insights for where we find ourselves today. But to answer your question, Tony, yes, we are. Christianity, as all religion, is in evolution, and we will move into a new religious, complexified consciousness, and
Yeah.
you see that in younger generations already.
Right. So let me ask you more to locate yourself in this, and um, you know, uh, you're a Roman Catholic, and there's a lot of Catholic moral theology around AI, and I think the Catholic Church was we're really the first community in the Christian community to talk about AI, transhumanism. I mean, I heard it. I was reading about it from Catholic theologians and philosophers before I was reading it from Protestant ones. That's for sure. Um, do you do, do do you get a lot of pushback or um, blowback from your theological articulation from your own community? Because I mean, just even to talk about process theology, I mean, that pokes the bear with so many different Christian communities, let alone, some of the ideas, some of the theological language. And again, take this as vulnerable or as not as you want, but I am really curious, like how have you navigated, which I'm sure you've gotten pushback and blowback on some of your theological ideas.
You know, honestly, I don't feel that I've gotten that much pushback. People just ignore me, so it's not that they push back, they just don't talk to me, which is probably just as okay. But, I mean, Catholic theologians, many of them, don't, they are respectful, but they have no clue what I'm talking about. I can see that even in my own department. They're nice people, they're all trained in Thomistic theology, and they're comfortable with the Christian mystics and the medieval stuff. But when it comes to evolution or process, oh my God, that's like, it's probably close to original sin of some sort. Honestly, I have to tell you, I really could care less. It's like the last thing
Yeah.
I would
Okay.
worry about is like, oh my God, they don't like me. Well, yay. I mean, I just, fewer people to talk to. I can just have more time to think and write.
Hmm.
Um, no, honestly, my mother used to have a saying, which I think ever since I was growing up, she told me, the world steps aside for the person who knows where she's going. And I think Jesus had something like that as well. He
Hmm.
had a mission. And I guess, Tony, if I were to put this in another way, I think for me it's a mission, it's a call. If God is at work in my life, in a sense, I have a call to share, what God is, the way I'm seeing things and the way I see God, kind of rising up in new ways. This power of love, this power of life, this love who seeks more love, basically, and an unfinished God, a God who needs us to become more fully God, and that just, for Catholic theologians, I mean, that's just like, ugh, what are you talking about, and like, oh, she's not orthodox for sure. Many
Hmm.
colleagues do that thing, or she's not Catholic anymore. Well, excuse me. I mean, who died and made you Catholic?
Yeah.
So we all of a sudden, like theologians get nervous, people get nervous, they all start being little gods, like, no, that's not what God is. Well, how do you
Mm.
know? I mean, that's the whole point, is that, God is an experience. When God becomes a definition, I really, really worry about that. Meister Eckhart was right. I pray God to rid me of God. If I think I know what God is,
Yeah.
it's not God. I can tell you that. It's like
Hmm.
something in me. So, do I worry about any of this? Not at all. In fact, I think this is one of the best times to be doing theology today. It is such an exciting time to be thinking about God, world, and self in new ways.
Yeah.
The world is changing quickly, and it's a carpe diem.
Yeah. I want to, before Brent's got some questions too. I have one more question while we're in this space, and it's a question that since I've started reading you, and since I've started reading Teilhard. And by the way, I started with Jacques Ellul, so a very sort of
Oh,
pessimistic view of
oh my goodness.
technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But this is the one question I've been dying to ask you.
Okay.
Who is Jesus Christ for us today? It's the Bonhoeffer question. Who is
Yeah.
Jesus Christ for us today?
Yeah. Jesus the Christ, or Jesus Christ? How we frame that question is going to be important. So, if we ask, is Jesus Christ the one true Savior who has saved me, and I have grown beyond that to say that Jesus is the Christ, that I see in Jesus what it means to be in full relationship with God. And therefore, I think Jesus, in a sense, holds out what salvation can mean for me, but it really requires that I fully participate in this invitation to put on Christ. That this Christ is not yet, even St. Paul says, the sufferings of Christ are still lacking. They need to be fulfilled in us. And therefore, there's something about us that we haven't given ourselves enough credit for, that we have an active role in what the Christ becomes in this ongoing evolution of life. And therefore, I think salvation, I cannot put that on one person, because I have to then accept that his natures, Christ's natures are truly divine and truly human, in this Aristotelian way. And I don't think that's what nature is at all. I think Jesus really had a God consciousness. I think he really, in a sense, was God, in that he came into that full reality. But then so too, I too am called to the same reality, but maybe not to the same extent as Jesus. I am called to that in my own way. And the beauty is, I think that I participate in what this revelation of God can mean fully, and I think that's what life means, is that every single person, and here the question of divine dignity has been too reduced. We think just loving our neighbor makes them dignified. No, I think divine dignity means every single person bears something of that godness within them, that God is incomplete apart from every single human person, everything that's alive, every single creature, even if you want to extend that to the natural world, because I think we're a recapitulation of that natural world on a level of self-thought, and therefore it's living out our divine vocation. And so in the truest Athanasian sense, God became human so that human may become divine. And that is the very early church's understanding of incarnation. And therefore, we have not really lived that out. All the way we practice it and live it is like Jesus comes, Jesus has saved me. And therefore, we put the responsibility outside ourselves onto this person, Jesus, who is beyond me, who is other than me. And that's like, well, guess what? It's you. Tag, you're it. It's your Christic self, and you really need to be really in touch with that in the best way that you can each day, to live from that center of love, to live from that trust and that faith. Because I think what we're talking about here in terms of the new heaven and the new earth, is a new wholeness. And it can't be whole if we're always partials, if we're always incomplete, if we're always living out of a weak humanity that needs a strong divinity. And God's like, what are they talking about? No, you are really strong because I am with you. I am in you. That's the whole point. So we got some things a little backwards and mixed up, and it hasn't bode us well. We're constant, and this is why AI and capitalism and everything else, we're constantly looking for those things, those supports, because I can't be fully who I'm supposed to be. So I need something. I need a technological device. I need to buy new clothes. And I'm saying, no, all that it takes to be the fullness of God in this particular way, in this particular form, we have it within us, every single person. And that's why human dignity, whether the poor or the homeless or those left out, it is a horror on the body of Christ, because this body cannot really live when half of the body is just thrown to the margins, thrown to the curb, and just treated as commodities or just collateral damage. That's a body that's deeply wounded and could die, and we have to really face that.
This concept of wholeness and the body of Christ, and then linking this back to becoming the ultra human and who's, editing or manipulating our physiology, I would imagine feels like almost a certainty. Some people will embrace this and many will not, whether they have ethical reservations or philosophical, religious, economic, they will not have access. And so it's easy to imagine a coming apart, even a speciation event, where some people are manipulating their brain chemistry and their bodies and otherwise. What does that mean for the body of Christ if we become genetically, physiologically separate?
Yeah, no, it's really true. But and actually, it's not when we do that, we are already there, actually. We already are on really, in a sense, different ontological levels, whether it be excess wealth or, some people just have the means to enhance their lives, whereas others
Nutrient density, access to nourishment. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, here in Chicago, just walking down the street, homeless basically on every block, And so I ask myself, how is this possible? How is this possible that, people have literally no place to call home and that they are begging on the street? How do we call ourselves, So it's not like, what do I do? And it is a question of what I do, but it's a question of every action that I have. It's a question of how I wake up in the morning and how I think about myself and, the choices I'll make this day. So, Christ has no body now on earth but yours, as the prayer of Saint Teresa says, and that is the deepest reality. And this body is not only divided, but it's like being pulled apart. It's in fragments, and a body like this cannot live, and that's why our planet is suffering. I think a strangulated body is a wounded planet. And there's a lot of work to be done, and quite honestly, it is each one of us, but it's also the institutions we belong to, because institutions carry a lot of power, and they are very formative of how we think, whether they condone our values or just say, don't worry about that stuff, that's just pipe dream stuff, just do what we're telling you to do. That's not going to work either. So I think we need, and here I take the Catholic Church right into this. It's very nice statements, from the Vatican on all this stuff, but you can't hold on to medieval frameworks and medieval theology and think we're going to get to a better world or a more wholeness in the body of Christ. It ain't going to work, and honestly, the body will continue to divide. And to go back to your original question, Brent, we will have those who will survive and those who won't. That is a reality. But I might also add, that is part, and here's where Christianity should be counter-evolution. Evolution is precisely that. It does have survival of the fittest, right? It does have those who have the means and are most fit, they will live on, and those who are not fit, they will die out. So, Christianity is saying no. I mean, the New Testament is about no. All are part of the dying, of the life ahead that we're called into, and that's why Christianity is, in some ways, it's not just counter evolution. It's calling us now. Here, Henri Bergson, the French philosopher, is really helpful, because his idea of creative evolution is not that evolution is just this ongoing, continuous thing. He said, when it comes to the human, there's something here that makes a leap. And he called it like a creative leap, a leap of consciousness. And to me, that's what Christianity is about. It should be a creative leap of consciousness within this otherwise flow of evolution.
Ilia, though, with the with the idea of sort of counter evolution, or could you frame it like that the Christian is fully aware of the evolutionary impulse, and because we're aware of it, we don't want anyone to be left behind. We want everyone to be. We want everybody to experience the goodness of God.
That is it. When I say counter, I mean it's actually a deepening of it. It's not we're just going to buy into the collateral damage or survival of the fittest.
I understand.
No, there's something about us. That's why I'm saying we have to take hold of the mystery within us, that divine depth dimension, that image of God that we call it, or whatever you want to call it, right? It's there, and the more we can live from that deeper wellspring within us, the more we can rise above, like a Bonhoeffer idea, rise above the forces of resistance, to say, no, that there's something about us, that we live for love. And here's where I think it is a call to radical love, a call not just to be loved, but to rise beyond that need for, reciprocal love, to the selfless love, the agapic love, that really is the kind of love that leaves, leave behind better relationships, leaves behind something that is more of wholeness. Whether or not we ever succeed, success, by the way, is never the goal, right? It's never about success. It's a question of, are we living the best that we can this day, the fullness of our own personhood? Are we really in touch with what prevents us from living out of that deep relational self, that presence of God within us that wants to shine in this particular way, and therefore to love in this particular way? Are we living from that each day the best that we can? And I think that's what resurrection will be, how we love, ultimately, and to the extent that we love. We will then leave, an eternal mark of our own personality onto this cosmic scope of evolving life.
Ilia, you wrote earlier this year, and quote, Christians are sent into the world to enkindle collective will for evolutionary advance, to channel energies of love that drive cosmic convergence, but we cannot fulfill this mission through institutions that betray it. What does that mean practically for our churches today? How must those institutions evolve?
Well, great question. And I think first is every institution, I mean, I'm going to talk Christian institutions, must bring science and religion into a new field of awareness, understanding that these are two aspects of knowing the one whole. So I would take wholeness as the operative lens for institutional Christian institutional life. I would take science and religion of ways of knowing those wholes and finding ways that they can complement and deepen one another, and therefore finding new ways of prayers and practices that help deepen our lives. I have to laugh because I still go to Catholic Mass. I mean, actually, I love liturgy and the sacramental life. But holy God, we praise Thy name. Holy God. So, great. We have this power, this sovereign power over us, and I feel protected. I'm like, wow, okay, and so much for that power within me, right? And so, where are the songs? Where are the prayers? Where are the new art designs and the rituals that help us move to a new level of Christian consciousness today, that help us be part of this evolutionary flow towards more life, more love, more life, even in an AI world? So institutions are resistance to change. They settled into some form with prayers and rituals, and they're like, oh, and that we are a resistant species to change on the whole, which is funny because AI is changing us very quickly. So why we're so kind of beside ourselves, because we are changing with AI, but we really don't want to change. We want our families and our friends and everything to remain the same. So we're such an ambivalent species, quite honestly. I find it's really all over the place. But institutions have to wake up. I mean, we hold on to medieval ideas, medieval principles, even Reformation ideas and principles, Reformation theology. That was great, in the 16th century, 17th century, 20th century, or whatever century it was. We're in the 21st century, and it's speeding up. It's going quick. So my fear is evolution is not a given. It simply is not a guarantee of anything. Teilhard was very clear. This process can abort. The train can derail. We can have a global catastrophe. Life will continue on without us, by the way. It doesn't necessarily need us. God is a power of life, and God has presence all the time in the world, even though God is always working in time, because God is that timeless time, you might say, always eternal, the eternal now. And therefore, I think God will just keep working on until, billions of years more, until something new can emerge. So I think we have to take hold of what we are, update institutions, update, our ways of thinking about religion and science, or religion and evolution, and then engage in a more thoughtful way on what we're becoming. And becoming is a key word.
Ilya, bro, this is quick because is it possible though to like I've often thought about like could someone put together a reformed theological vision that takes a positivist approach to Teilhard or to your work, right? Like because I'm a reformed Christian, that's the heritage that was left me. I mean, do we have to like going all the way back to Augustine and the church fathers and mothers? Do we have to like just like I mean put that aside because it's been so inculcating and so I don't know overshadowing, like because you've come up with new theological language, and Teilhard certainly did.
Mm-hmm.
So is it worth the effort to go back through and like recalibrate? I'm using Reformed again. You're a Roman Catholic. Like, would it be a good exercise to write a Reformed theological perspective on
Yeah, well,
convergence?
the funny thing is, Tony, the way religion evolves, it's by emergence. So all the past is already enfolded. It's what has brought us here in certain ways. And we're constantly discerning that past in the present. So even as we say, should we keep Augustine, should we get rid of him? We're constantly thinking, well, do we need a doctrine of original sin or not? Are we weak or are we strong? So the question, I think, is it's not to disregard the past, but we have to keep the past in its proper place, you might say. It's good, it's interesting, it's important historically, but I think we often confuse history with theology and with the present. I find a lot of theology today is really just history. It's historical ideas, from Plato and Augustine and the Cappadocian Fathers and, Thomas Aquinas and all dead guys, I might say, so it's okay. I mean, I'm just going to put it out there. But, for example, I heard a homily last week and the priest was saying, I forget the example, but he was saying, I realized when I was weak, he was telling us he was a young hospital chaplain and he was very nervous about going into a sick room, with a patient. And he said, I wasn't sure, what to do. He said, I felt really my weakness and what I would say. And he said, I just stood with them. And a little boy, from the family just, started sharing. And I said, wow, that's the way God works. So when we're weak and we rely on God, and I thought, well, that's one way to look at it. But the fact is, there was a strength there. Actually, so sin has made us emphasize the weakness of us and we need God. But the fact is that God is already here. So how about our strong side? Which is the fact that we're already God-drenched, and that it takes a kid who's not so worried about, whether original sin or weakness, just to kind of blurt it out because, out of the babes comes the mouths of wisdom. And so I think to answer your question, I don't think we need to rewrite, or reform theology or rewrite theology per se. We have to take note of the past, but we also have to let go of the past in order to engage the present for a more life-fulfilling future ahead.
Thanks, Ilia. Thank you.
On maybe a lighter note, I'm curious, how do you use ChatGPT, or do you? And am I going to find you on the Neuralink whenever that's available? Are you excited about this stuff? How's your personal orientation towards these emerging technologies?
I'm really fascinated by ChatGPT and Claude and all those. But so for example, I am writing this book and I did, check things out on ChatGPT, and then I noticed that it was giving some wrong references and some wrong material because I have, some of this stuff. And I'm like, that's not right, So we really have to be vigilant about using this kind of software because it can be helpful, but we have to do our own homework, and I think I do worry about undergraduates. I told my undergraduates, do not rely totally on ChatGPT because you may get wrong information. But when we become over-reliant on technology, we not only thin out our cortical processes, our ability to think, but we lose the capacity for really deep reflection and creative thought. So it's a concern. I love technology, by the way. I'm fascinated, completely fascinated by it, and I will try the latest thing that comes out. But I'm also I'm a scientist by training, so I always test everything, right? I want to see, really, what does this do? How much can I use this? Where is this going to take me? And then I'm very critical about, what kind of output I get. It's useful, it's not useful, so I use it with discretion. And what was your other question? Oh, yeah, the Neuralink. I live with a sister who has Parkinson's disease, and I said, why don't you think about getting a chip? She's like, absolutely not. I said, it can be great. They can put the chip in. They can modulate the neurotransmitter stuff. So she wouldn't do it. If it was up to me, I would do something like that. If it was for biomedical purposes. If it's for say, if I get to be 90 years old and, I want to write another book and my thought processes are slowing down, should I get a chip in my brain? I'd be like, maybe not. So I'm not opposed to this stuff. I think it's coming anyway, quite honestly. I think we will have chips in our skin. We already have wearable devices. chips in the brain, they're going to be not too far in the future. But what do you want it for? That's the question. Are you happy the way you are? I like the way I am, so I don't feel I need a chip right now. I might in the future. I would not be opposed to it. But I think there are more important things to think about, quite honestly. I wouldn't spend a lot of money or time there.
Yeah, makes sense. And what are those things? And this is one more of your quotes that I loved on your May essay on lessons for the modern era. Reason is not having the final answer. It's about asking better questions. So like,
Yeah.
what are those questions? Also, it was validating as two people spending a lot of time asking questions. What are those questions that lay people who have this on their brain, but they have a busy life and kids and a job and a mortgage? Like, what are the questions in this realm that we should be asking ourselves?
Well, I ask basically the same prompt to my undergrads almost every semester, and it's the three conching questions. What must I know? What must I do? And what must I hope for? And I think the question that's most important of those three is, what must I hope for? What do I live for? And I think that is the basic question, it's the existential question of life. I exist, right? Like, I don't exist just to think. That's wonderful. I exist to love. To me, thinking is great, but loving is a better form of thought. It's a better form of knowing. And I love because I believe and I trust that we're here for more life. It's not just to life, but we're here for more life. And we have no idea. And here, I actually love that saying from St. Paul, eye has not seen, ear has not heard, all that God has prepared for those who love God, And we have no idea, our lives, even if they're extended with technology, say, 120 years, 200, even 200 years, in this vast cosmos of expansion with billions of years before, we have no idea, what quote unquote eternal life will mean. But I anticipate that it's going to be something that will be incredible, beyond anything I could ever imagine. So I want to know, will my life make a difference to this world? Does being here in this short amount of time that I'm given, does it make a difference to those who I've encountered, to the way I have gone about this world, or not? Who have I lived for? And what do I hope for?
Yeah, thank you for that. Is there anything that we have not asked today that you wanted to be asked or wanted to espouse on as it relates to these topics?
I think you guys have done pretty well on covering a range of topics here. So,
Well, thank you. I'm in a delightful education for ministry group at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Atlanta, and that I told them that I was interviewing you, and there was some fangirling in the room. And so to your question on, am I making a difference? There are certainly a lot of people who are looking to your example.
For
And
sure.
thank you very, very much for sharing your reflections and your wisdom with us today.
Great. Nice to be with you. I enjoyed your questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Ilia. Thank you. Well, Brent, we got the person on our podcast that we knew we wanted from the very beginning. Ilia Delio, who is a pioneer in sort of this theological, techno, emerging, evolving world, and she did not disappoint. So well done, Brent, in helping to secure her on the New Garden. What are your first thoughts?
I really enjoyed that. This probably could have been about an hour longer in the episode, and I would have been happy to keep going. I loved we haven't ourselves bought into what we want to be. Mm-hmm. And I love her now. Okay, yeah, we got this high-speed train. Where are we taking it? And I think that's an animating question for a lot of all this. How do Christians want to use these technologies? What do we want to become? What's our aspiration here? And if we're not starting with grounding in the answers to those questions, we risk all sorts of misapplications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I loved the why questions that she wants us to ask. The why this technology, the why are we here, the questions of who do we want to be are very, very provocative. And we had this I had this similar experience with another one of our guests, Robert Nicastro, Ilio's colleague, and it just some of the theological framing really resonates, but it's so counter to my own formation as a pastor and theologian. When she says we got to deal with all this, when she was referencing the Chalcedonian formula, God fully human, Jesus fully human, fully divine, and we just got to move past that, is basically what she was saying. I'm like, oh my gosh, like every Orthodox fiber that I have, what's left of them, or in my being, was like rattled. And and I do think there's questions, and part of the extra hour we could have gone, Brent, for me, was around sin and around. I agree with her. I think, and as a Protestant and as a Reformed person, Calvin, for the Catholics it's Augustine, for the Protestants it's Calvin, or the Reformed folks it's Calvin. Like total depravity, you're a worm. The Lutherans had Luther that way. We have very low anthropology. And I am encouraged that she wants us to have a high anthropology, that she wants to see strength, that she wants to. And one of my favorite verses, when Jesus says, you'll do greater things than these. Like, I think she really wants us to believe that and to live into that.
Yeah. I come to this delightfully unencumbered by questions of orthodoxy, so I just get to see what works. But I really appreciated how she used Christianity as it relates to evolution. When she said, obviously about Christianity being evolutionary, in that it's uniquely positioned because it's pointing towards something, that we're moving towards a reunification with God, and that Christianity is well positioned in that. And then to see us as having some role in the ultimate fulfillment of God is kind of a scandalous idea, but it's igniting. Like, I feel something when she says that. But then to also say, by the way, Christianity needs to be counter-evolutionary. It's not about some people winning and the rest dying off. It's let's all go together and let's all get to this better place together. And to me, that articulation of Christianity holds space for, yes, let's use this technology to become something more holy and more loving and more life-giving in a planet that is sustainable and also doesn't require a lot of us to die to get there. It's that's a vision I can buy into, to use her words.
Yeah. And she's super comfortable with mystery. I mean, for a scientist, she certainly articulates her positions well, but she kept going back to mystery and mystery and mystery and mystery of God. And I think one of the provocative things for me was that part of the unveiling of the mystery of God is within us. And by the way, there were times where my, again, Orthodox radar was like, that's very pantheistic. It doesn't sound like Christianity. It sounds like a pantheistic religion, God in you, God in me, and all that. But I do think there is something really insightful and compelling about exploring the mystery of God within our own, not from an anthropomorphic, but the way that she talked about God within us, Christ in me. It's not I who live, but Christ in me. So which is an Orthodox saying, by the way. It's a, key biblical New Testament concept that Christ lives in me. And that mystery in some ways can be unveiled in that exploration through prayer, through worship, through our openness to that sort of our own relationship with God as evolving. I thought from a pietistic perspective, from a spiritual discipline perspective, that was very encouraging and challenging at the same time.
Yeah, it leaves a lot of agency up to the human.
Yeah.
And even that, we might screw it all up. Teilhard said, we might all wipe ourselves out. And, but yeah, don't worry, God's going to be around for billions more years, and we'll figure out another thing. It's I was with a group this morning. I was talking about Psalm 8, and where the psalmist says, "You've made humans a little lower than the angels." But if you talk to Ilia, she's like, I'm not sure about that, because the sort of the paradox of this high value of life versus
it could all end and God will still be God kind of thing. Like that juxtaposition is challenging for me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Same
saying?
here.
Like, yeah, I mean, um, I wish, you know what I want to do with Ilya? I want to have like Bible study. Like I want to pull out these texts and read Psalm 8 together and read, John 10:10. You should, I came that you have life and have it to the full. Read the text that, talk about nothing is impossible when Paul says nothing is impossible with Christ. Like, what does that mean? Like, I'd love to read scripture with her and see how that theological impulse would help interpret her theological impulse would help interpret these texts.
Yeah. I've been spending time thinking about like deep wilderness concepts lately, which if you spend enough time in AI land, you get to that. And I'm like, all right, if my little 7-month-old son, if in life, like things go real wrong and like I watch him starve or he watches me starve, like where's God in that? And what does that mean for the arc we're on? And like, how do we apply that evolutionary Christianity, God doing a bigger cosmic thing that we don't fully understand? How do we apply that to what might happen if the train goes off the tracks in this era? Is a little tough for me to square too.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I mean, too, like back to the agency piece, like, and to fight against the train going off the tracks, like who's going to be the conductor? How are we going to steer the train? Where are we headed? That is a human question. We're not just sort of like drawing straws and saying this straw means that we should just, abandon ship, or this straw. Like, we really need to actively discern, and part of that active discernment is like actually doing something. Like, all right, I'm gonna go into the cockpit and I'm gonna drive this thing, right? And I think I'd rather have Christians doing that than, candidly, like neo-Marxists, like secularists, atheists. Like I'd rather it be somebody who has a telos, who has an end in mind.
Because the guiding ethic was really clear. I really appreciated her. Well, where do you draw the line? Well, how are you using it? Are you using it for just your self-perfection and ego vainglory, or are you using it for wholeness and love? And what do we hope for? More love, more life.
Yeah, more life.
Great. And that's an easy reductionist framework, but one that is theologically consistent and works.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. As always, thank you all for listening to the New Garden podcast. Thanks for journeying with us. Thank you, Ilia, for joining us, and for everybody who made this episode possible. Please like us on social. Give us the follow. Tell everyone you've ever met or may come in contact with that this is the best podcast you've heard this week, and they got to listen. Come visit Tony at First Pres Church in Atlanta. He's doing great things every Sunday. They're doing great things in the community. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.
The New Garden is a production of First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta. Produced by Tim Haney. Executive producer, Mark Wallace McGuire. Music by Sindhu Geed.
Seeing eyes swallowed by their pride. Night see we're running out of breath. It's time to leave and head on. We're the ones with scars, broken, dying hearts, somehow left to carry up and bear. They just stand